I greet you with grace and peace, and I welcome you to this gathering as we honor and remember the life of Emory M. Lee, a devoted public servant, a proud Stanford alum, and perhaps most importantly, a beloved husband, father, grandfather, a dear and dedicated mentor, and a wonderful friend. Emory lived a life that quietly and persistently bent toward justice. He cultivated communities through civic engagement and public policy and institution building, even here at Stanford. And so it is good and right that we honor his life right here at the heart of our campus. Because in so many ways, Emory was the heart of Stanford for others. He created a home for Stanford's Asian American students when a sense of belonging was far from assumed. He championed the Asian American Activities Center and helped establish the Stanford Asian Pacific American Alumni Club so that graduates could remain connected not simply to the university, but to each other. He mentored, he listened, he reminded young people that they indeed belonged. Emory understood that institutions change because someone loves them enough to press them to become better. And so today, this community, why we gather as a testimony to his legacy, and the students that he encouraged, and the leaders he nurtured, and the communities that he strengthened. Because of him, today we can confidently proclaim that Stanford is better. We recognize, though, that this gathering brings two seemingly opposite emotions together all at once, maybe more than two. We confess that we still feel the weight of his absence, and we come carrying our own grief. And yet, this service is called a celebration of life. And it's true that remembering his life and legacy, we feel a deep sense of admiration and affection and true love. But here's the thing. Grief and love, they're just two sides of the same coin, aren't they? We grieve to the extent to which we have loved. And we have so loved Emory. And so we gather this afternoon, both in our collective grief and our deep appreciation and love for him. Through remembrances and in our gathering time, we will bring those memories to mind and allow them a space in our heart. So come, let us remember, let us honor, and let us celebrate the life of Emory Lee.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Deacon Richard Chu. I currently serve at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And it's really wonderful to see so many gathered here to honor my classmate, Emory. I would like to bring us back 71 years to the Stanford of 1955, when Emory and Mike and I joined the freshman class of 1959. In 1955, Stanford was a racially segregated campus with quotas for Jewish, Black, and Asian American undergraduate students. In our class, the quota for Asian students was fewer than 10 for the freshman class of 1,250. 4 years ago, as you may know, Stanford apologized for its Jewish quotas of that era. And I learned today 29% of Stanford undergrads are Asian. When we graduated, Mike, I don't know if you remember the commencement speech. I haven't any idea what that was said. But it was given by by John Gardner from New York City, and he made a call to action. He said, Stanford's growth as an institution depends not on alumni donations or loyalty, but on the kind of people its alumni become. Emory answered that call by building communities and Asian American organizations where none existed before. On this campus, Emory was active in the formation of the Asian American Activity Center in 1972. He was a co-founder of SAPAAC in 1989. SAPAAC is the Stanford Asian Pacific American Alumni Club. And I was recently elected to the board, and I'm the fourth member of my family to serve on the SAPAAC board. Although Emory no longer walks on this earth with us, we can keep his spirit alive by telling stories about him as we are doing today. I know this personally. I never met my grandparents, my grandfathers, but I kept their spirits alive by including their stories in my dissertation on Chinese American history. Each of us, especially Marceline, Randall, and the grandchildren, can keep Emory's spirit alive by continuing to tell his stories as we are doing today. Thank you.
I'm Michael Wong and a friend of Emory's. Emory rhymes with memory, and my memories of him go back to our days as 18-year-olds. So that's 70 years. My life from freshman year at Stanford until today began with him. So my memory of Emory spans my entire adult life. I feel so lucky to have been Emory's friend. In fact, we called each other best friends over the many years from then to now, and I think it has to do with our very long history together and common interests, which were Stanford football, good food, a good time, jazz, and the developing sense of an Asian American community. And I always admired Emory's devotion to family and respected his understanding of the past and the way it informs the future. I can't recall the exact time or place of our meeting, but Stanford in 1955 was not like today. For one thing, there were only a handful of Asians of any kind at that time. So it was natural that the dozen or so of us who were Asian Americans, and that term did not even exist then, gravitated together. Emory and I found one another initially in part because we both liked jazz and he had a car. Fast forward to the 1970s, after he and Eileen spent some years in Taiwan, they returned here with Randall and Marceline and visited me in Glendale. Although we had gone our separate ways, I went east to med school and he had relocated in Palo Alto after years in Taiwan. It was as if we could pick up again without missing a beat. We both had become big football fans and, of course, Stanford boosters, and Emory had a job in public service while I was starting medical practice. When I could make it up to Palo Alto for games, I stayed with him and Eileen at their wonderful home, which evolved over the years to include their beautiful garden, which both of them tended with care. He was the godfather of my son, and spoke at my son's funeral after the tragic motorcycle accident. He spoke at my mom's memorial service and described his first visit to our home when he expressed surprise at my folks' books, wines, and my dad's love of classical music, all of which he eventually came to have himself. One aspect of Emory that stands out in my mind was the exquisite way he cared for and loved the people around him and the things that mattered to him. It was a quiet respect for the integrity of those people and things, and his home and garden reflected that respect and care. So did his collection of Japanese folk toys, miniature cars, and documents of Asian American history that was donated to Stanford. And so did his lovely family. He carefully tended all forms of life, whether animal, mineral, or vegetable, and from the persimmon tree in the driveway to his grandchildren, from his friends and his cars. Emory was the kind of guy whose kindness, thoughtfulness, generosity, and smile were his trademark. He represented all that is good and memorable to me about my college years and beyond. I will never forget him and will always treasure the memories of our time together. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great, thank you. For those who don't know me, I'm Stella, married to Randall, and Emory's daughter-in-law. They say you don't just marry a person, you marry the whole family. So when I married into this family, I knew I was joining something special. But I truly hit the jackpot with Emory as my second father. He was the kind of person who didn't just welcome you, he made you feel indispensable. Did it help that we shared a bond of being 100% Chinese Americans with Chinese immigrant parents? Or that we both shared a love for the Cantonese dish ham yi ji yuk bin, salted fish steamed on minced pork hash? Or that I went to Stanford? Absolutely. I think I had an edge from the get-go. Not only did I marry into this Lee clan, I also married Emory's vast collection of obsessions. It didn't take long to be indoctrinated into Emory's world. A true kid at heart, he absolutely loved to collect stuff. And when I say stuff, I mean it. I think he had a goal of hoarding more Japanese folk toys, toy soldiers, die-cast Packard cars, than the local toy store. Emory embodied the spirit of childhood long after everyone else had grown up. The house on 38 Erstwhile Court was more of a museum of Emory's treasures than a home. Think display cases brimming with trinkets upon trinkets, all of which brought him such great joy. Family dinners at 38 Erstwhile Court were a marathon of gourmet food and plenty of Emory's wine. Yes, he collected that too. The wine was plentiful as the laughter. Emory's playful spirit was a foil to Eileen's brilliant, sharp-wittedness. Dinner rarely began before 9 p.m., but once seated, we were treated to the ultimate show. Seeing the two of them interact was the master class in balance. Eileen, the formidable Stanford law grad, and Emory, the effortless humorist who could disarm her sharpest arguments with nothing more than a glass of wine, a mischievous smile, and a story or two of his own. I'd like to take a moment to send a special message of love to Eileen. Though her illness keeps her from being here physically, she's with us in every way that matters. For 65 years, Emory was her protector, and even as he left this world, he did so knowing she was safe and loved. Their devotion was truly rare. They were inseparable. The day before Emory passed, the hospice nurse told us we had a few days to gather the family. But Emory, that rascal, had plans of his own. Likely he wanted to spare us the long goodbye. But the one person that mattered the most, was right there by his side. Despite her Alzheimer's, the nurses said Eileen had a profound, deep sense of what was happening. She stayed with him through the night. And in a final, beautiful act of devotion, she was found the next morning wearing Emory's treasured Rolex. He loved that watch. He loved that watch so much, and though she couldn't remember him placing it on her wrist, we all know what it meant. A final gift from a man who wanted one of his prized possessions to remain with the love of his life. How fitting that today's celebration is right here in the very place where they exchanged their vows back in 1961. It's been 3 months since Emory left us, and the void is profound. I wonder if the timing was purposeful. We've just emerged from the year of the snake, good riddance, a season marked by quiet shedding, profound reflection, and the forced pause of loss. Yet, it was in the stillness that we learned to take stock of what truly matters. Now, we forge ahead into the year of the snake. The year of the fire horse, a rare season that demands intense resilience, speed, and action. I believe Emory left us with a quiet command to honor the lessons of the past and harness them into the strength needed for the road ahead. Emory's life is our compass. He taught us to serve with purpose and intention, yet he possessed the rare grace to pause for the small joys, a savory meal, a fine bottle of wine, a silly joke, and above all, time with friends and family. Look at the photo on the back of your program. Emory, in Paris, New Year's Day, 2014. It was near midnight Paris time, and we were about to head off to the Moose Bar to watch his favorite football team play Michigan State in the Rose Bowl. Glowing with pride, he was sporting his cardinal red, that unmistakable glimmer in his eye, ready to cheer on his team. And in that moment, he was exactly who he is and who he was. A man living life to the fullest, wrapped in the warmth of family. Let's carry that joy forward Let's honor him by loving one another boldly and turning our purpose into action. Thank you, Emory, for your spirit, your dedication, and your affection. Let us carry his fire forward.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Lorenzen, and I'm Marceline Randall and the Lee family. How fortunate you were to have as good a father as a person can have and as good a mentor in life. And so God bless Emory, one of the finest persons I ever knew. I was regional director for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for almost 3 years and worked with Emory. Prior to then, I was at the General Services Administration. I'd re-entered the government under President George W. Bush. And I was assigned to work with the Federal Regional Council, which Emory headed up. There had originally been 10 in the country. Now there was only one. And the only one that still worked in the country was the one that Emory ran because of Emory. I watched how skillful he was, how organized he was, how good he was, how smart he was, and was just amazed. It was wonderful working with him. When I was offered the job as regional director for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, by Secretary Leavitt, I said, I'll take it under one condition, and said, what's that? And I said that Emory Lee not retire as executive officer, because I said, he makes the region work. I'll be there for 2 or 3 years, but he makes it work. If he's going to retire, I'm not taking the job. So I called Emory up right away, and I said, Emory, they just offered me the regional director job, but I'm not going to take it if you're going to retire. And he said, well, if you're coming, I'll stay. So working with Emory was one of the great privileges. I never had any doubt that I was in good hands because of Emory. The region was in good hands because of Emory, not because of me. And I did compete with Emory for stuff and wine, though. We both had an affinity for those items, and I don't know who came out on top, but we were good competitors. But to me, it's a privilege to be here because I have great gratitude for Emory. Like I say, as good a person I ever worked with in government, and as good a person as I ever knew in my life. So God bless Emory.
Good afternoon. Good evening. My name is Lon, and I had the fortune of being Emory's mentee beginning in 2009 during my senior year at Stanford. By happenstance, I was scrolling through the Stanford Alumni Mentoring website, and on that directory, I came across Emory's name. At the time, I didn't know anything about Emory's contributions to the API community. I just saw that there was an Asian American alum who was working in public service and health. And so I reached out over email, and I remember starting that email, "Dear Mr. Lee, ... to which he responded and very tactfully requested that I not call him with that title anymore. But he accepted my meeting request, and that would be the beginning of our mentoring relationship, which lasted well beyond my years as a student. And so today, as I prepared my thoughts about Emory, I reflected on everything that I've learned from him over the years. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that I really learned what it took to be a great mentor and all of the traits that are embodied by a great mentor. And so today, I hope to share just a few memories that I have of Emory in that regard. First, Emory was very generous with his time, and he had this ability that I called just trying to make the impossible possible. Whenever I met with him, we would often have coffee outside on the benches outside of Tressiter Union, and he would always show up with notepad in hand, pen in the other, and as we talked, he would be scribbling down names of leaders, organizations that I should be speaking with and talking to. And whenever he had the opportunity, he would create opportunities for me to pitch my ideas with his colleagues, and that ability of him to try and open up doors for me was something that I've always cherished. Secondly, he taught me a lot about mentorship and leadership, but largely just by the way that he carried himself. Whenever we met up, 95% of that meeting time was just him listening, asking questions, trying to understand what were my goals, what problems I was facing, and he never used that opportunity to try and shape my way of thinking to be a certain way. And whenever he didn't know the answer to something, he would admit it, and then we would brainstorm to try and figure out how I could come up with an answer to that. And thirdly, Emory was just a very thoughtful person and mentor. As I looked back through my emails, I was surprised at how many times Emory was the first person to initiate an email if he hadn't heard from me in some time. He would sometimes just send a simple check-in email, or sometimes it was an article about some healthcare innovation that he had read in the newspaper. And Emory didn't know this at the time, but during my first few years joining the professional working world, I had lots of millennial existential anguish, and his support and outreach was something that always meant a lot to me. In retrospect, while we can do some of those things some of the time, Emory was great at doing all of those behaviors that make a great mentor consistently and repeatedly. Even now, Emory remains a defining example of mentorship in my life. His guidance, kindness, and thoughtfulness will be deeply missed.
Good afternoon. My name's Gordon Chang. I'm a professor in the Department of History. I thank the Emory Lee family for giving me this privilege to speak and share some thoughts with you today. I knew Emory almost from the very beginning of my association with Stanford as a faculty member back in 1991. So it was a long association. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces of former students along the years. Emory and Eileen warmly welcomed me when I arrived here, and we remained good friends through the many, many years here at Stanford. But I need to tell you about a connection we made soon after our first meeting. I was astonished to learn that I was intellectually related, not by marriage or blood, but intellectually related to them because of the first research project I undertook at Stanford. I was studying the life and work of Yamato Ichihashi, one of the first scholars of Asian ancestry in the United States. He had been a Stanford undergrad and then joined the faculty in the 19-teens, so a long time ago. He taught history and international relations for many years until he and his family were forced to leave their campus home, which was near what is now the post office, to leave for incarceration during World War II. Emory and Eileen stunned me when they shared the news that Eileen's father had been Ichihashi's friend and attorney after the war years. So Emory and Eileen literally helped open doors for me and my research on Ichihashi. As we had said, we live in a small world. Emory understood the importance of history and documenting history. He loved the study of history and knew its importance. He was obsessive. He built a huge collection of invaluable documents on the Asian American experiences. He gathered much of this archive as a side activity during his professional work with HEW. He didn't do it on company time. Emory traveled widely around California and had the foresight to collect newsletters, flyers, local histories, clippings, and even postcards related to Asian Americans, all what we call ephemera. His collection has invaluable and rare material also on particular groups, such as Pacific Islanders and refugees from Asia. And he donated this extraordinary collection to Stanford, an example of which prompted others to donate rich research material to the library. The library is now one of the leading institutions in the country to conduct research on Asian Americans. Thank you to Emory. The Emory Lee collection is housed at the Special Collections and Green Library and amounts to more than 31 linear feet in shelf space, 53 boxes and cartons. I bet Eileen and the family were very happy to see the freed up space in their house. You might remember when they came and carted that away. On a personal note, I always will remember Emory as a positive, forward-thinking, and person of great generosity. And it was a delight to interact with him as an alumni leader of the Stanford Asia Pacific American Alumni Club, a supporter of Asian American Studies and the Asian American Activity Center, and as a leader of the National Advisory Council for the Center of the Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. I took the liberty to gather some reflections from others who knew Emory to share with you and wanted to celebrate him. I don't have time to read them in their entirety, but will just share a few lines of what others have said. The first comes from my colleague in the history department, and some of you who are former students may have taken classes with him. He was a founding member of CCSRE, Ethnic Studies. This is from Al Camarillo, who couldn't be here today because he's actually giving another lecture right across the way at this time. Al says he has three particular memories of Emory that are etched into his mind. One, every greeting with Emory was with a broad, enduring smile that lit up his face as we extended a handshake and embrace. What a beautiful, authentic smile. Second, tireless enthusiasm and work for the work of CCSRE what it was doing with Stanford students and faculty, all of which meant so much to him as an alum of culture. And third, as has been mentioned, his love of Stanford football. Emory was especially animated whenever we had our football talks, Al and he, during the years when my son, Al's son, Greg, played on the team, and during Greg's long career at the NFL. The next few lines are from Rick Ewan, who served as director of the Asian American Activity Center for many years. Rick recalls, one particular story I must share was his perspective of how Asian American students of the 1990s possessed a tremendous amount of flexibility in pursuing interests, passions, and careers. Emory once commented to me that he always wanted to be the Jerry Lewis of his generation. Jerry Lewis, for many of you know, was a great comedian in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I'm trying to imagine Emory, the stand-up comedian. And that he wanted to do this back in when he was coming into adulthood. He somewhat lamented that due to parental pressures, cultural norms, and a host of other factors, that becoming a comedian was never meant to be. Emory would say that Asian American students of today could pursue anything they wanted. I think he was jealous. Next is from Henry Tsai, an alum who counts Emory as a dear mentor, and we heard from Lon earlier about Emory as a mentee. Emory and I became friends. We texted about Stanford football and saw each other at games. I sometimes got in trouble with security for visiting his VIP section up from the nosebleeds portions, the seats. The last time I saw him was at his New Year Days get-together in 2019. He had professors, neighbors, and family, and has set a great example of how to build community. He'll always carry his lessons on building durable organizations, his spirit of service, and his commitment to lifting up the next generation. The last reflection comes from Cindy Ng, who retired from the director of ACUPC a few years ago. Cindy's in the audience. Emory was always generous with his time, always asking what he could do, and never refusing a student request for help or mentorship. These student-mentor relationships extended well beyond graduation, with Emory continuing to check in with his mentees after graduation. He had connections throughout Stanford and leveraged these networks and the respect in which he was held to support our community. He was a quiet but powerful voice. For all of the above and more, Emory was inducted into the Asian American Activity Center Hall of Fame in 2014 and received the Stanford Asian American Pacific Islander Alumni Club Alumni Award in 2000. I was very touched when he came to Cindy's Amy Blue Award ceremony for community university service, I believe in 2023. He was walking with a cane and seemed more frail, but as always, he showed up to support. It was the last time I saw him. For all you have done as a leader and an inspiration, thank you, Emory.
Good afternoon. My name is Howard Wolf, and I head up Alumni Affairs here at Stanford. It's truly an honor and privilege to be here, so thank you so much for the invitation. I've been in my post for 25 years, but that's nothing compared to the years of service of Emory, so I had to reach out to some former members of our staff who really knew him when he started to get involved in the world of alumni affairs. And something can be very, very clear. When you ask a Stanford Alumni Association staff member for their thoughts about Emory, the first thing that you notice is that they smile. Big smiles, warm smiles, loving smiles. As one staffer shared with me, when Emory entered a room, everyone was happy to see him. Just like we are all happy to celebrate him here today in Mem Chu. Others have talked about his broad service at Stanford. I want to focus on his alumni status and his alumni service. It started, of course, when he contacted staff and asked how he and a few others could start a Stanford Club for Asian American alumni, as you've heard from others. He was deeply, deeply committed to strengthening the bonds between alumni and the university, and to help the university better understand what was important to his community. Under the heading of "No Good Deed Goes Unpunished," Emory was rewarded with being elected the club's first president. And Emory took this role on with particular acumen and aplomb. He helped the club get off the ground by publishing a regular newsletter, working closely with the Asian American Activity Center here on campus, hosting an annual dinner, and more. And he saw that as a seasoned leader, that's a euphemism for mature, he needed to round out the club's leadership ranks with younger alumni, and he did exactly that. He found other younger Asian American alumni to join him in this quest, young alumni who would later become leaders in the Asian American alumni community. Then his volunteering broadened across the entire university. He was 3 times the class of 1959 reunion committee member to help engage classmates. He gave career advice that you heard about just recently in another mention. And then in 1993, he was asked to join the Stanford Alumni Association Board of Directors, a post where he served with enthusiasm and impact for 3 years and is still remembered. Emory is remembered by staff and fellow volunteers as a warm and welcoming person, committed to every role he took on, and with a contagious enthusiasm and appreciation for the university. And as we've heard already, he was remembered as a faithful Monday morning quarterback with opinions after each and every Stanford football game. And if the same could be said about his rabid support for Stanford men's basketball, I remember vividly, and I read it again this morning, an email exchange with Emory when he gave me a detailed distillation of all the things he found lacking in the coaching staff during the Johnny Dawkins coaching reign of Stanford men's basketball. And let me add, he was absolutely correct. In recognition of the leadership described above, along with his other major initiatives at Stanford and his professional life, Emory was in fact inducted into the Stanford Multicultural Alumni Hall of Fame in 2014, as you heard from our dear professor before me. We'll always be grateful for his good work. Each year, those undergraduate classes that are in reunion mode are given the opportunity to send in a page in what we call the class book. It used to be in paper, now it's digital. And the last class we do that for is the 60th reunion. And I went this morning and found Emory's page from his class book in 2019. And I'd like to read for you what he wrote. And I'll remind you, this is when he was still living in Palo Alto before he had moved to the Forum. He wrote the following: "One of the wonderful things about living in Palo Alto is the close access to campus, which allows me to remain engaged with alumni activities and beyond. I take advantage of so many speaking engagements by both the faculty and visiting dignitaries that keep me intellectually alert and alive. If that weren't enough, how about being a season ticket holder for Stanford football and men's basketball? I am truly blessed to be a lifetime, and I quote, red hot. Red hot indeed. Thank you, Emory, for all you have done over the years for Stanford, over so many decades. May you rest in peace. Thank you."
When I was born, my grandpa began what I can only describe as a lifelong campaign. From my earliest memories, I was inundated with Stanford propaganda. Stanford sweatshirts for birthdays, cards that opened up and played the Stanford band song, relentless emails with the subject line, "Go Stanford." It was no secret that he wanted one of his grandchildren to attend his alma mater, and I took that hint from an early age. Subtlety was either never his strong suit or never the goal. Here's an email I received in 2018. "Hi, Maya. Greetings from beautiful Stanford. This article may be of interest to you. Love, Grandpa." The article attached, U.S. News and World Report ranks Stanford best in the world. Message received. Whenever we visited, he made sure to show us the best of what Stanford had to offer. Football games, the Cantor Museum, concerts at Bing. Though I can say that as a 7-year-old, excursions to the opera and to the museum with my grandparents did not have the alluring effect intended. But some moments did. One of my favorite memories is from a walk around campus when I was young, and he suddenly announced that he had a great idea. Without telling us his plan, we got back in the car, and the next thing we knew, my grandma, my brother, and I were breaking into the Stanford barn to pet the horses. He said that he sometimes took my grandma there because she had always wanted a horse, and this was the closest she was going to get. He then walked around the stables exclaiming, "Horsies, horsies," in his typical goofy and lighthearted spirit. Ironically, all of this lobbying had the opposite effect on me. For most of my life, I swore I would go to school far from California. He talked about Stanford so much that I actually decided I would go anywhere but. Then, the summer after my junior year of high school, I attended Stanford rowing camp. And to my dismay, I fell in love with it. Maybe it's impossible not to, after seeing the golden arches of Main Quad and the nonchalant air of students fountain hopping around campus. Or perhaps his campaign had worked all along, and his years of advocacy had quietly seeped into my subconscious. Then, from the moment I arrived as a freshman 5 years ago to graduating last spring, he enveloped my college experience with love, warmth, and most importantly, free storage every summer. He invited me over for Chinese dinners, and I would gladly accept with a big bag of laundry in tow. He would let me borrow their extra car in my freshman year, and I took it on weekend trips with my friends. I brought my roommate over to pick persimmons from their tree. I shipped packages to their house to avoid the line at the package center, and he would hand deliver them to me to my dorm. When he still had his season tickets, he would text me before each football game to let me know if he and my grandma would be attending or not, which never ultimately mattered because I never went to the games. But I did find them at my first big game, just long enough to take a quick selfie before running back to find my friends. My family being in Los Angeles, I didn't see my grandpa all that frequently growing up. We weren't particularly close, and I was a little bit scared of him because he would always make me eat my vegetables when I would come visit. But I feel so grateful to have been close to him during such formative years of my life and for the final years of his. He showed me a tremendous amount of love through presence and all of those small acts of care. Even as he and my grandma slowed down progressively as my 4 years went by, I watched him remain intellectually curious and passionate. I watched him care for my grandmother with extraordinary patience and tenderness as her Alzheimer's progressed. And I got to share the joy of my graduation, which he gleefully attended even in his wheelchair. My memories of Stanford are inseparable from my memories of him, and I think that was exactly his goal. For most of my life, I thought of him simply as Stanford's most devoted fan, but what I didn't realize, and what I'm only beginning to understand now, was the depth of what he gave to this school. The students he mentored, the relationships he built, his leadership at the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, and many other organizations, as I'm learning from speeches today. The outpouring of love since his death has shown me a side of him I never fully saw. And standing here in this place that he loved so much, I'm filled with gratitude that his campaign worked, that I got to know him during these years, and that this beautiful place we both love is where we get to remember him today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Connor, and I'm honored to be here today to remember and celebrate the incredible life of my grandfather. It has been a great privilege to hear from the other speakers about what a remarkable impact he left on not only everyone here today, but also on the countless others he met throughout his life. While you all may have known him as a classmate, as a colleague, as a mentor, or as a friend, I was one of the few people lucky enough to know him as a grandpa. As a kid, you have quite a different perspective on who your grandparents are than sort of everyone else that knows them. Growing up, I'll admit I wasn't really interested in the work he was doing with HHS to improve lives of everyone across the country, or the contributions he was making to the Asian American community here at Stanford. Instead, I was usually concerned with whether or not there were going to be Its in the freezer or a new Lego set waiting to be built whenever I would visit him in Palo Alto. It wasn't until I was much older that I think I really appreciated just what a person my grandfather was. Even over the past few months, I have still been learning new things about his life. Things he had accomplished, groups he had helped establish, and many stories from his life growing up that I hadn't come up before. But even as a kid, without knowing everything I know now, I could appreciate my grandfather for many of the same reasons that I know everyone else who knew him appreciated for him as well. His kindness, his sense of devotion, and his generosity. He always had time for us grandkids. He had time to take us out to art museums or to the symphony or the opera so that we could grow up with an appreciation for the arts that he did. He had time to take us all to summer camps at Stanford so we could pursue our interests in baseball or gymnastics or soccer or rowing, and really to take us off our parents' hands for just a week or two. He had taken time to take me to countless Stanford football and basketball games so that I could share his passion for the Cardinal with him, something which he was successful in instilling. He had time to take us on trips to Paris so that we could see the world like he and my grandma loved to. He had time to travel to Chicago to visit me when I was in college, even when I wasn't able to visit them in Palo Alto quite as often. And he came and watched me march for the first time in the marching band when Stanford played at Northwestern in 2015. And I was a little sad that, Northwestern won that day, and I think he was too, but he was still there to support me. And he always had time for us to drive down to Palo Alto to visit whenever I was home from college. And I'll always be grateful for all of the time that he spent with us. And while I'll always wish I had more time with my grandpa, to chat with him over the phone briefly about just how things were going, to go to another Stanford football game and appreciate the Buck Cardinal Club that I think was lost on me as a child, to listen to stories about his life over dinner, or for him to teach me everything he knew about his enormous Japanese folk toy collection. I'll forever treasure the time that we did have. And I know that there is so much I can do to honor his legacy and keep his memory in my heart. I can get more involved in my local communities to help those in need. I can work to keep in touch with all of my different heritages. I can start my own many different collections of things that will one day inevitably drive my family crazy trying to deal with. And most importantly, I can be a devoted and loving partner, just like my grandpa was for my grandma. I miss him very much, but I know that he's an enormous part of the person that I am today, and I'll always be grateful that I got to know him as my grandpa.
Things I loved about my dad: his warm smile and easy laugh, his obsession with newspapers, a minimum of 3 a day, the New York Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Jose Mercury, his love of gardening, that he drove a bright red Volkswagen Bug to work in San Francisco. So cool. His immense love of all things Stanford, his belief in the value and importance of public service and volunteerism, how much he loved running errands and clipping coupons, as he pronounced it. I discovered when I was going through his contacts on his iPad that he had made shopping notes. For example, under H, hot dogs. Oscar Mayer classic beef uncured franks, $5.99 for 10. Small size, disappointing. Or Hebrew National Kosher beef franks, $6.29 for 7. Eileen doesn't care for. His lifelong commitment to his myriad collections, the extent of which came into crystal clear view when Randall and I had to clear out their house on erstwhile Court. His early appreciation of California wine, his absolute devotion to our mother, and how much joy being a grandparent brought him. When we lose someone who has been central to our life, the meticulously curated architecture of our world as we know it crumbles. As I've reflected on my dad's passing and my relationship with him over the years, it called up memories of 3 especially painful times when I said goodbye to him. In 1978, when our mother entered law school, I was 14 and a freshman in high school. Dad had taken over the lion's share of running the household. He did most of the grocery shopping and cooking and made sure I had lunch to take to school every day. He also bought me snacks my mother never would have approved of. When Randall left for college the following year, my relationship with my dad grew closer, and over time, he became my person. I accompanied him to Stanford home football games. Looking back on it, I know I must have been a poor substitute for Randall, as I showed little interest in understanding or appreciating the game. I was there for the vibes. The game was sort of beside the point. I cherished our ritual of driving over in his red Bug, parking near Town and Country Village, and walking across El Camino to the stadium. If Dad was frustrated by my indifference to the game, he never expressed it. I took more interest in going with him to basketball games at Maples Pavilion. Or it might be more accurate to say that I took more interest in the basketball players. I don't remember the details exactly, but I bet my dad helped me figure out how to send a fan letter to my favorite player. I ended up following Randall to Connecticut for college. While I'm sure it was our dad's dream to see one of us enroll at Stanford, the universe, or in my case, the admissions office, had other plans. For our mom's part, going back east for college wasn't an option she had had, so she was excited for both of us. Unsurprisingly, at 17, I lacked the emotional maturity to consider what saying goodbye to my dad would feel like. Palo Alto was boring, and I was out of here. Our parents didn't get to move us into our freshman dorms. They put us on a plane at SFO and said goodbye. Now, having sent 2 of my own children off to college out of state, I can't imagine how heart-wrenching it must have been for my dad. And I definitely wasn't equipped to handle the overwhelming emotions of being 3,000 miles away from my anchor in the world. As a side note, I want to mention that it was Dick Chu and his wife Janie who met Randall and me at the airport and moved us into our freshman dorms. In my first few months, Dad wrote to me several times a week. I loved going to my P.O. box and discovering a thick envelope filled with newspaper clippings. This continued throughout my college years, and for decades to come, in fact. In my sophomore year, one of my friends joked, "Is your dad's job just cutting out newspaper articles?" But it was how he stayed connected to me. It signaled that he was always thinking of me. Articles about things I was interested in, greeting cards at every holiday, comic strips he knew would make me laugh, lots and lots of Garfield. It made the distance between us easier. He continued sending me newspaper clippings for years, and when his grandchildren arrived, they became lucky recipients too. In the last few years, when mailing letters became hard for him, he simply took photos of articles and comics on his phone and emailed them to the whole family. I will miss this immensely. A few years after graduating from college, I came back to Palo Alto and joined my mom's educational toy company. This intense period of time allowed me to cultivate an adult relationship with my parents. I would spend the day working alongside my mom and get to see my dad when he got home from work. Although I always knew of Dad's unwavering support during our mother's journey to becoming a lawyer, I was finally mature enough to appreciate not only his everyday acts of love, but just how transcendent his love for her was. I saw what marriage and midlife could look like by watching my parents. When Randall and I ended up marrying in the same year, Dad didn't waste any time getting us to sign up for ballroom dancing lessons, one of many activities he and our mom loved. He quickly began planning his dance with me and his dance with my sister-in-law, Stella. I never saw my parents happier than when they were dancing. A week after Philip and I married, we moved to Pennsylvania so I could attend graduate school. The pain of saying goodbye was absolutely gutting. I think I cried all the way to Reno. But the envelopes of newspaper clippings resumed, keeping that connection between my dad and me alive. The last goodbye embedded in my soul was when we decided to move to Davis. After grad school, we returned to the Bay Area and started a family. Becoming a grandparent ignited pure joy and passion in my dad. He embraced the role with unbridled enthusiasm. He poured his heart into it just like he'd done with all the causes he cared so deeply about. He shared his great loves, Stanford, of course, music, art, good food. Having grandkids gave him license to start new collections, Legos, wooden trains, children's books, games, even state quarters. It was a perfect blending of his collecting bug and his devotion to his grandchildren. He imbued them with an understanding of both their Chinese and Japanese heritage, and when they were older, entertained them with stories of his childhood antics in Portland and his madcap adventures at Stanford. He was a superb storyteller. The happiness that my dad experienced spending time with my children reminded me to find that joy too. I know I broke my father's heart when we decided to move to Davis. It was one of the few times I remember him being unsupportive. We had years of visits back and forth, but I know it could never have measured up to us living 20 minutes away from each other. I didn't get to say a final goodbye to my dad, but I'm at peace with it. I know he knew how much we loved him, and I know he couldn't have let go had he not believed our mom was going to be okay. As I metabolize my grief and slowly figure out how to rebuild the architecture of my world, I will hold in my heart my dad's genuine and abiding interest in knowing people, his ability to see beauty and joy in both the mundane and the extraordinary, his deep, deep love for his family, and his warm smile and easy laugh. He will always be my anchor, even now that he's gone. Dad subscribed to the adage of not having regrets. In that spirit, I'd like to end with a poem that invites us to celebrate the memory of our loved one through simple, everyday acts. The poem also just so happens to mention a few of the things he loved. In Lieu of Flowers by Shauna LeMay. Although I love flowers very much, I won't see them when I'm gone. So in lieu of flowers, buy a book of poetry written by someone still alive. Sit outside with a cup of tea, a glass of wine, and read it out loud, by yourself, or to someone, or silently. Spend some time with a single flower, a rose maybe. Smell it, touch the petals, really look at it. Drink a nice bottle of wine with someone you love, or champagne, and think of what John Maynard Keynes said, "My only regret in life is that I did not drink more champagne." Or what Dom Perignon said when he first tasted the stuff, "Come quickly, I am tasting stars." Take out a paint set and lay down some colors. Watch birds. Common sparrows are fine. Pigeons too. Geese are nice. Robins. In lieu of flowers, walk in the trees and watch the light fall into it. Eat an apple, a really nice big one. I hope it's crisp. Have a long soak in the bathtub with candles, maybe some rose petals. Sit on the front stoop and watch the clouds. Have a dish of strawberry ice cream in my name. If it's winter, have a cup of hot chocolate outside for me. If it's summer, a big glass of ice water. If it's autumn, collect some leaves and press them in a book you love. I'd like that. Sit and look out a window and write down what you see. Write some other things down. In lieu of flowers, I would wish for you to flower. I would wish for you to blossom, to open, to be beautiful. Thank you.
Dean Steinwert, friends and family, good afternoon. On behalf of our whole family, I'd like to thank you all for gathering here today to honor and celebrate the life of my father in this magnificent church where he and my mother were married on this beautiful campus that played such an important role in their lives. It's a sad irony, although perhaps it's inevitable, that we learn so much more about our parents after their passing. But learning what we have about my dad these last few months, including through the beautiful remarks this afternoon and the many thoughtful notes we've received, has been a deeply comforting gift to our family. I want to thank today's speakers and everyone who has reached out to share stories and tell us about the impact my dad had on them. Everyone who encountered my dad experienced his good-humored, jovial nature, his generous spirit, and ready laugh. He was quick to smile, friendly to all, and a jokester at heart. He was that way with everyone, from his closest family and friends to the most casual acquaintance. Where did that come from? I don't really know. It makes sense, however, when you learn that he was the youngest of 8 children, 5 daughters and 3 sons, with 23 years separating the oldest from my dad. As the baby of the family, and especially as the last son to hold the Lee name, he was doted on, indulged even, especially by his sisters. And he learned to ham it up to get attention in a very large family that was busy running a restaurant. But then, when he was 22, the doting on my dad came to a halt because he met my mother. And for those of you who know my mom, you know she is not a doter. She did not dote on her kids. She doted on her grandkids only a little, and she certainly did not dote on her husband. And when my dad would ham it up, my mom would smile indulgently, but mostly just roll her eyes. For many years, my dad adapted. But fast forward to when my sister and I had homes and families of our own, and we would host dinners for my parents. And in the last few years, when my parents were unable to travel, we would gather at their house here in Palo Alto, but we would do the cooking, and we would treat them as guests in their own home. I like to think that these gatherings were some of my dad's favorite times, seated at the head of the table, being doted on by his own kids with good food and great wine, while he entertained us all with his stories and jokes. Of course, it would have been nice if he had offered to help do the dishes, at least occasionally, but, you know, he's the youngest of 8 kids. My dad loved to tell stories and jokes, as you've heard. There was only one problem. He could rarely make it to the punchline without laughing. I think that might have impeded his career as a stand-up comedian. It's funny, it's a tendency I seem to have inherited, which is kind of an odd thing to inherit when you think about it. One of his favorite stories involved an excursion by my dad and his older brother to hunt for crayfish on a lake near their home in Portland. I think my dad was maybe 8 or 9 at the time. It was dark, and they came across a cabin by the lake. My uncle snuck up to look inside the cabin, when all of a sudden he came running back to my dad, saying, "Quick, run for it." It's at this point that my dad would burst out laughing before he could finish the story. When he finally stopped laughing, he'd finish. His brother had said, "There's a naked lady inside." And my dad would start laughing all over again. He last told this story at a family dinner in 2024. And even at the age of 87, he still couldn't get through the story without bursting into laughter before getting to the part about the naked lady. I kid you not. As the son of immigrants from China, my dad held Confucian values at his core. He believed in respect for one's elders, the importance of family, the value of education. But at the same time, he had a quirky side, a desire to be a little bit different from the norm. As kids, we found this endlessly annoying. For a period of time, we had a lawn made not out of grass, but dichondra. Anybody remember that trend? Which we were not allowed to walk on, let alone play football on. Our Christmas lights were solid blue when all we wanted was good old multicolored lights, like literally, as my daughter would say, literally everyone else had back in the 1970s. His prized possession was a 1974 bright red Volkswagen Beetle with a stick shift and no air conditioning, which he used to drive to San Francisco every day, long after it was safe or sensible to do so. We used to joke that he loved the car more than his own kids. In 1982, after their first visit to France, my parents bought a Peugeot, despite having been warned by friends not to buy a French car. Believe me, I could go on. Through his example, my dad stood for the ideals of public service. He believed in the power of government to do good, to improve people's lives, to strengthen our society and communities, to help those less fortunate. He served in both Democratic and Republican administrations for 40 years, steadfast in his belief that public service was a calling. As a kid, I was never quite sure what to make of my dad's career, particularly in a place like Palo Alto, surrounded by other kids whose fathers, and it was mostly fathers back then, had fancier sounding or higher paid jobs. After all, working for the US Department of Health and Human Services doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But over time, and with maturity and wisdom, I came to understand what my dad embodied, that the promise and potential of our government depend upon the talents and commitment of dedicated public servants like my father. My dad was proud when I entered into public service. And although I only spent 14 years there, I'm proud to have followed in my dad's path for a time. As others and Stella have mentioned, my mom isn't here today. Her absence leaves a huge void because my dad's devotion to my mom was unwavering through many years and many challenges. For the first years of their marriage, my parents had a fairly traditional arrangement, as Marceline alluded to. My dad commuted to the city for work while my mom gave piano lessons at home. She handled almost all of the cooking and cleaning, and on the weekends, my dad would do the yard work. But when I was in high school, my mom set her sights on attending law school. And so, almost 20 years after dropping out of college, she entered Stanford Law School. In the late 1970s, a nearly 40-year-old woman with 2 teenagers at home was a novelty and an experiment for Stanford. Virtually overnight, her and my dad's roles reversed. He now handled most of the household responsibilities, from grocery shopping to cooking to keeping some semblance of stability in our family. More importantly, he was her bedrock, her advocate, her cheerleader, the one who talked her out of quitting on multiple occasions when she would despair that she had what it took to survive law school while raising a family. What I didn't appreciate at the time was just how much fortitude, selflessness, positivity, and patience my dad brought to bear. After my mom graduated, she received her diploma and promptly threw it in the trash, not wanting a reminder of a difficult 3 years. My dad duly rescued it from the garbage, had it framed, and proudly displayed it for the rest of his life. And over the ensuing 40 years, he stood by her side with good humor and devotion as she pursued the private practice of law, started a small business, and ultimately as she confronted the most cruel and unforgiving disease. He set an example for what it takes to build and sustain a marriage that inspires me to this day. My dad was a relentless optimist, always upbeat and cheerful. I can't recall ever seeing him depressed or down. Last September, at the beginning of the football season, he was taken to the ER for a fall. Whenever the doctors and nurses would ask how he was doing, he would say, "I'm doing fine as long as Stanford football is doing well." Well, come to think of it, I guess that didn't turn out so well, either for my dad or the football team. I hope Andrew Luck isn't here. Dad, you left us an enduring legacy. You spent a lifetime contributing to your community, anchoring our family, and setting an example for us. May you rest in peace now, rooting for Stanford sports, enjoying a fine Bordeaux, watching your grandchildren thrive as young adults, knowing that Mom is safe and well cared for, and gratified to have had the love, admiration, and respect of your family and friends.
Please stand. Now it is time to say farewell. Let us pray. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for the life of your servant Emory, for all in him that was good, kind, and faithful, and for the ways your grace was made visible through his life. We thank you that nothing in life or death can separate us from your love in Christ Jesus, our Lord. Trusting in that promise, we commend Emory to your eternal care, restored, made whole, and held in your peace. Comfort us who remain, renew our hope, and strengthen us to walk in faith until we too come to that place where every tear is wiped away and death is no more. Amen. You can be seated.
Friends, this afternoon we have shared our grief and our gratitude, the ache of loss and the unmistakable joy of having known Emory. And here is the quiet truth that we leave this place with. Emory lives on. To the extent to which we not only share these stories, but we live them, he lives on in and through us. He lives on to the extent to which we too live lives marked by thoughtfulness, kindness, generosity, contagious enthusiasm, living out that spirit of childhood. He lives on in the ways in which we take great delight in small joys, good food, good wine, freezers filled with itsits, newspaper clippings that go on forever, collections of all sorts, documents and trinkets alike, toys and die-cast cards, treasured watches, and, well, the joy in Stanford. Stanford football, Stanford basketball, Stanford propaganda of all sorts, even against our own will receiving it. Emory lives on to the extent to which we mentor and encourage and listen, opening doors, creating opportunities, lifting others up so that the impossible is made possible. He lives on when we lead with warm, radiant smiles, when we serve with purpose and intention, strengthening both institutional and personal bonds. He lives when we too believe in the promise and potential of our government, led by talented and dedicated public servants. He lives when we shower others with everyday acts of kindness and devotion, loving others just as fiercely and tenderly as he loved us. And Emory lives when we, in lieu of flowers, live as he lived. And so this day, may we go from this place as living witnesses to his legacy, carrying his life's work forward in all we do. May you go this day with the courage to do the work that remains, with tenderness toward one another, and determination to love life and each other. And may the one who calls us into beloved community steady our steps, strengthen our hearts, and bless the work of our hands. May you go in peace this day and all days. Amen.